go. Welcome everyone to our first webinar of our Springing into Action Building Resilient Communities with Green Infrastructure series. We're so glad you're here tonight for our first webinar, Going Green at Home, Green Infrastructure That Works. My name is Madison Rodman and I'm an extension educator with the University of Sea Grant, a Minnesota Sea Grant program at the University of Minnesota Duluth. Again, we're really glad you're joining us, taking time out of your busy lives on a weeknight to be with us here for this webinar. Tonight's webinar is sponsored by Minnesota Sea Grant and the Natural Resources Research Institute and funded by the National Sea Grant Program and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Again, so glad you're coming to join and learn with us this evening. Before we get going, just a quick Zoom housekeeping. I know many of us are pros at this by now, but just a little intro of the platform we're using tonight. So you may have noticed that your camera and microphone are off, and they will remain off for you for the entirety of the webinar. So we won't be hearing any dogs or anything that might be happening on your end. So feel free to have a snack, get cozy, and enjoy the presentations with us. You might also notice there are some auto-generated captions that you can enable or disable on your screen. So if you see the small CC icon, you can click that and see captions, especially helpful if you're in a loud place. And we invite you to be asking questions throughout the presentation using our Q&A function. So we'll have a time for Q&A for our speakers. So you can find that question and answers tab right next to that show captions button on the bottom of your screen. We do also invite folks to upvote questions. If another participant asked a really great question, feel free to kind of upvote that, and that question will rise to the top for our Q&A for this evening. You can use the webinar chat that Tiffany is just putting some information in there. You can use that to communicate with the speakers, or if there's something else you need to share, we'll be monitoring that as well. And we've had some questions whether this will be recorded, and yes, this webinar will be recorded, and all the resources shared tonight by the speakers will be compiled in an email and sent out to you in the next few days. And then we'll send a note when the recordings are available as well. So again, like I said, tonight's webinar is the first of 3 in our special Springing into Action series. I know tonight doesn't feel as much like spring as yesterday, but the next 2 Tuesdays, we'll be having 2 additional webinars. Tonight's webinar focuses on green infrastructure at the home. And then next week, we'll be focusing in on native and deep-rooted perennial plants. And then the last webinar on March 25th will be about green infrastructure in our community. So we invite you to join to these webinars as well. And we'll be dropping some registration links in the chat to those webinars, just in case you maybe only heard about this first one and not the other 2. So broadly, these webinars are designed to help you feel more comfortable and confident in considering green infrastructure practices on your property, share how green infrastructure is currently used in spaces across our region, and connect you to regional resources, agencies, and organizations that support stormwater, native plants, and green infrastructure. And really, we have some wonderful speakers lined up to share with you. So hopefully you'll get a new connection or a new idea by participating in these webinars. You might be hearing me say green infrastructure, and a little bit more about that will be coming later. But overall, this series is part of a larger Minnesota Sea Grant and Natural Resources Research Institute project to support the adoption and use of green infrastructure in our communities in northeastern Minnesota. We're working with communities from Midway Township in the south, all the way up to Cook and Lake County and Grand Marais and the city of Duluth to look at our codes and ordinances for opportunities for using green infrastructure as tools for community resilience. And again, if you don't know what green infrastructure is, hang on, we'll get you there in a moment. And here's a photo of some graphic of examples of green infrastructure in our community. And with that, I'm thrilled to introduce you to our 2 speakers for tonight. The first will be Tiff Sprague, who's the co-lead of this green infrastructure project and is a stormwater scientist at the University of Minnesota Natural Resources Research Institute. After Tiff's presentation will be Alyssa Bloss, district manager of the Carlton Soil and Water Conservation District. And with that, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Tiff. Take it away.
Thanks, Madison. I really appreciate it. If you don't mind advancing slides on for me, please. As Madison said, tonight we are here to talk about green infrastructure around the home. Our goal tonight is to give you a flavor of what is out there and what is possible. And that's kind of what my part's going to be at the beginning. And then I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa to really deep dive into rain gardens for us, which I imagine is the practice that perhaps a lot of folks are really interested in. And maybe you already have one and are looking to expand. And then we'll also make sure that we have time for Q&A. And as Madison said, don't forget that you can put stuff in the chat, or sorry, in the Q&A box, as well as in the chat box. So don't be afraid to ask questions throughout this presentation. Before we get started, though, I do want to define some common words that we're going to use throughout this presentation, just to make sure that all of us are on the same page today. And again, if you have more questions after we go through them, please do not be shy in asking those. And one of the common phrases that you'll hear when a lot of folks talk about green infrastructure or runoff or stormwater. And what do we mean when we're talking about stormwater or runoff? Runoff or stormwater really is this flow of water that follows from any precipitation event, a rainfall event, snowfall event, even snow melt. And in our urban environments, we think a lot of times about driveways, parking lots, roofs. We also think about lawns. We think about things like ball fields, and even runoff coming from forested environment. All of that is captured under this term stormwater. And in our urban environments, a lot of times stormwater is moving through things like a storm drain or a culvert. You might see those outside your property or at the end of your street. And in our rural environments, a lot of times our stormwater is moving through things like ditches, or particularly for folks who live directly next to a lake or a stream, that water may be moving directly off of a property right into that nearby water. I think one of the most important things to note about stormwater is that it's not treated like our tap water. So really anything that's on the ground is fair game for that stormwater to pick up as it makes its way to its receiving body of water. So things that we think about and things that we're concerned about are things like trash, pollutants, chemicals, fertilizers, excess soil, and road salt. And so when we think about stormwater management, what we're really focused on is how do we slow the flow of that water? So that way we don't have large volumes coming off of these paved surfaces where water can't get into the ground, as well as how do we make sure that we're not bringing those excess pollutants or sediments or chemicals that we're worried about? How do we make sure we keep those out of our waterways? Next slide, please, Madison. And then when we think about just that general complexity of how do we manage water across our landscape, we also know that on top of that, we're dealing with climate variables such as rain and snow patterns, growing seasons, temperatures, and we're seeing those further change and further add additional complexity to how we really think about managing this water. And how do we make sure, again, that we're slowing the flow of water and curbing pollution to our receiving bodies of water? Next slide for me, Madison, please. And today, that's one of the great things we're going to talk about is our primary tool that we love to talk about stormwater management, green infrastructure. Really, the goal of green infrastructure is that we're trying to mimic that natural water cycle. So think about in an area that's completely undeveloped, what does that water cycle look like? How long is water on the ground? What kind of opportunity does it have to soak in? What are its opportunities to get taken up by plants, move into streams? And so really what we're trying to do is develop or mimic that natural cycle by allowing plants to uptake more water, increasing how much water that infiltrates into the ground. And also, green infrastructure can double as helping to trap those nutrients and pollutants, especially the things that we're really concerned about. So, for example, we think about algae blooms and we think about E. coli bacteria, right? These are actually detrimental to human health potentially, can cause beach closures, economic impacts, vegetation concerns. And so, really, we want to figure out how do we keep our water bodies healthy so we can recreate in them. Next slide for me, please, Madison. And our hope today is that really we're giving you a flavor of a few green infrastructure practices. So I want to note we will not have time today to talk about everything you could potentially do, and we won't have time to go into super detail into any one practice, especially because I want to make sure to give Alyssa enough time to really talk about the endless possibilities that come with rain gardens. So let's get into some practices that we can do around our property. I think for most, the rain barrel seems kind of like this great entry point into how to store water on your property. And I think a lot of folks might already potentially, especially folks in this room, probably already have a rain barrel, or at least are familiar with the concept of a rain barrel. And I know a lot of gardeners use rain barrels just to alleviate the need to have to use tap water. But rain barrels really do act as a great kind of first line green infrastructure practice. And so some of the great things that rain barrels can do, one, it can keep water from dripping down your roof line into your foundation. That's also important. And it can really hold back that water that's coming off of your garage, your home, your shed. And really, we look at them as our most budget-friendly way, as we call it, to like be a good neighbor and just be a good community member by really trying to keep as much of the water that runs off of your property or your structures on your property. But there are some considerations when it comes to a rain barrel. Water's really heavy, so you have to be really thoughtful about where you're putting this barrel, making sure you're putting it on a level surface that really can support the weight of water. Thinking about design considerations such as an overflow hose. So if your barrel reaches capacity, that you're making sure that that barrel just isn't running over and dripping into your foundation. And I think for some folks might be a little hesitant in a rain barrel because they're like, well, maybe I'm not the world's biggest gardener. So like, what am I actually going to do with all of this water? But we still really think a rain barrel is a great option from the standpoint that after a few days after a rainstorm, you can actually just drain that barrel onto your own property, even if that's not necessarily a vegetable garden or a native planting. So it still acts as a great way to hold water back onto your property. Next slide, please. And I think the other thing is never be shy about how big those barrels can get. At my house, actually, we have two of the ones that you see on the left. Really, barrels come in all shapes and sizes, design considerations. They can be very aesthetic and they can blend in, and they can also hold a ton of water. Next slide, please, Madison. But sometimes even a band barrel can feel, I don't know, maybe daunting, or where are you going to put one? Or maybe you don't have a good place to put a barrel on your property. And so I think a lot of times, again, things like rain gardens are fantastic, but there's a lot of small options we can also do that hopefully maybe don't feel as overwhelming to implement green infrastructure. Things like planting essentially woody vegetation, trees, shrubs, particularly thinking about things that also can double as wildlife habitat or even as food for yourself or for our critters in town. And the other option to think about that's a small practice is aerating your lawn. Over time, our lawns really become compacted, and really just that aeration practice can improve not only your grass health, but increase water infiltration. But in the spirit of the nature of this presentation, I would say, where possible, where can you advocate for no lawn in general? And where can you look at your property and identify places to move towards more deep-rooted perennial plants or native plants. But again, for some of us, I think having a lawn area is valuable. And what options do we have to make sure that that grass is out, working to its best capacity to actually infiltrate water into the soil? And then I would say the next practice, especially in those areas where we are maintaining a lawn, is how do we make sure that that grass is healthy again and infiltrating beyond aeration, just actually keeping some grass around. The recommendation is to have your grass be at least 3 inches tall. And then again, where on your property could you look at areas where you could go to a low mow zone or a no mow zone, especially when we think along those shores right along lakes and streams. I think on the other end of the spectrum, though, going from one extreme to the complete other extreme, are green roofs. I will say that we are not gonna have you be a green roof expert at the end of this talk. We highly recommend that actually consulting with someone who is familiar with the design and construction of green roofs. But one of the things I wanted to point out about green roofs is there's a large misconception that the roofs have to be entirely flat. To actually install a green roof, and that's not true. As green roof technology has advanced, there actually are some designs that allow for a pitched roof, just depending on that degree of angle. So I guess what I say is don't rule your roof as a potential roof that can't hold a green roof, because it can. Um, And then Minnesota actually has some really nice recommendations. I'll put some of those links in the chat for design considerations, plant considerations, especially plants that can survive our northern climates. But I will say for a green roof, given the cost of it, the technology involved, the maintenance in terms of just even getting it set up, it's not the place that we usually recommend as the starting point, especially if you think you have a lot of water management issues on your property or really kind of want overall how water is being maintained on your property. But I think when a lot of people think of green infrastructure practices for the home, again, I think we already know rain garden is that first thing. I want to give a shout out to the bioswale. I think bioswales we think a lot about at the community level, and we'll hear a lot about bioswales in our third webinar of this series. But bioswales behave and act very similarly to rain gardens. But again, even going one step back, for some folks, maybe a rain garden and a bioswale still feel like, that's a little more engineering than I'm really ready to get into. And so really just also thinking about your classic native planting, typically one where you don't have to do a lot of ground excavation, you don't have to necessarily get into design considerations. So really depending on what your skill and comfort level is, a native garden can be a nice starting point as you maybe dip your toes in and get familiar and comfortable as you then perhaps advance to something like a rain garden. And just obviously a total shameless plug about our own webinar series, but next week is all about native and perennial plants. So highly recommend for learning more about those. But before I turn it over to Alyssa to talk about rain gardens, let's chat a little bit about bioswales. Bioswales, also known as vegetated swales, we kind of call them rain garden ditches. Really, you want to look at installing these on your property in areas where the water likes to already travel, which is a little different than thinking about where area is pooling or stagnant on your property. So really for bioswales, we want to really think about how is water moving across our property, and then could we put a swale in that area? Maybe it's this kind of muddy path or a gully on your property. And then just some design considerations for bioswales. Check dams are a common feature in a bioswale. For lack of better words, what they really are these pile of rocks that help to slow the flow of water in a swale, allow that water to kind of stay retained for a while, and then ultimately increases the amount of infiltration into your bioswale. To really understand kind of the availability of what kind of soil you have and what kind of plants could go in there. Could you put a bioswale in an area? Soil infiltration tests are highly recommended. We're going to provide some materials after class that will actually dive deeper into the kind of what, where, why of how of soil infiltration tests, as well as, again, more design considerations for things like the bioswale. And then I would be behooved not to say, northern Minnesota climate, we're constantly thinking about what are our salt tolerant plants. And some of the local nurseries and plant folks in town and along the shore have been really thoughtful about what those are. So we do recommend, especially thinking about on your property, especially in our urban environments, depending on where you're installing some of these practices, being thoughtful about can those plants handle that excess salt. And again, we're going to have a guidebook. Next slide, please, Madison. We're going to have a guidebook that's going to send some additional details out. Again, also about how to test your soil infiltration, how to really get into the mechanics of a bioswale. What does it really look like to think about green roofs on your property, and just what are all those little things you can do every day in your life that we call quote unquote green infrastructure practices. But I'm going to stop here for now, and I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa to just dive deep for us on rain gardens, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of rain gardens and what that looks like in our northern communities.
Thanks, Tiff. And thank you for having me here today. Let me see if I can get this squared away. Can you see my slides all right?
Yes, they look good.
Great. Okay. So thank you, everybody. So glad that we've got a good turnout tonight. My name is Alyssa Bloss, District Manager at the Carlton Soil and Water Conservation District. I was perusing through the list of participants. Some of your names look familiar from attending some of our Create a Rain Garden workshops that we've had in the last several years. I do want to say I've got a lot of material to cover. We usually pack a lot of this information into an hour, hour and a half of create a rain garden workshops that we usually hold here in Carlton. We sometimes hold them in partnership with South St. Louis Soil and Water as well. But again, talking about rain gardens tonight. So to start off here, let's see. So what is the Soil and Water Conservation District? Is this working here?
Yeah, it's working. Yep.
Yep,
What is
okay.
it? Yep, you're looking
Yep.
good.
Yep. So what is SWCD? So we are basically our own local government unit. A lot of folks don't realize that we're in your own backyard, but what we are is our boots on the ground conservation organization that helps the landowner ultimately enhance, restore, protect our great state's natural resources. And Carlton, we have a soil and water conservation district. For rain gardens in South St. Louis, your contact there is Kyle Hildebrandt. For North St. Louis, your contact is Kayla, forgetting her last name. For Cook, it's Kari. She's presenting on the third day. And then up in Cook, I believe it's Max or Steven. But everybody's doing really awesome work within soil and water conservation districts in our region. We're great, and we're really awesome people to work with. And we're not state, we're not federal funded, and we have funds to help you get conservation projects on the ground. So we help folks do wetland restorations, prescribed grazing, buffer strips, rain gardens, pollinator meadows, woodland stewardship planning, cover crops, invasive species removal, shoreline restorations, plus so much more. So what exactly is a rain garden? And this is a little caption. Hopefully you guys can hear this. There's some sound effects to this that might hopefully work. Yep, here we go. Can you guys hear that?
I don't think so, Alyssa, but
Okay,
the
that's all right.
it's great though.
Cool. At least you're seeing the graphics. So this rain garden is filling with water. It's storming, raining, and water is infiltrating down through the soil, up into the air. And so a rain garden is basically like a typical flower garden, but it's able to absorb runoff, break down pollutants, and pollinator habitat. So just double, triple whammy here. These small scale pollinator gardens, green infrastructure have so much benefit. So how do they work? They collect runoff from rooftops, downspouts, impervious surfaces. They're often designed for 1-inch rain events. They slow reduce runoff. They help infiltrate and recharge groundwater and capture that overflow of excess water. So this is a typical landscape in our neighborhoods. We've got lots of impervious surfaces here that Tiff had already touched on. Your roof, your lawn, so green concrete, your streets, all this runoff coming from your impervious surfaces going out into the street, collecting gunk, collecting pollutants, collecting organic matter, all of this stuff, which eventually ends up into our local streams, our local water bodies, impairing our water quality. Did you know that 1 quart of motor oil can contaminate 250,000 gallons of water? So these rain gardens are designed to capture stormwater runoff before it gets into our street, our sewer systems, our water, our local water bodies. So where would you put a rain garden on your property? And when you attend one of our rain garden workshops, we actually print off a map of your site so you can look at the contours, look at what's going on in your project, look at what's going on. And then also, if you do a site visit with one of us at the district, we'll come with mapping materials and all kinds of good stuff. But ultimately, think about your site and where water drains from or goes to during a rain event. So for instance, water comes from your downspouts. It comes from your driveway. It comes from maybe a sump outlet. It could be simply a depression in your yard. Maybe water runs into your street or it comes from your street. These are all great places to put rain gardens. So capturing that runoff before it goes out into the street. Obviously avoiding septic systems, buried utility lines, wells, and then easements. So for instance, if you live in town, a lot of cities have easements into people's properties. So we don't like to fund projects that are typically that have easements on them just because they might get ripped up. And we're using taxpayer dollars to help fund these projects too. But also if it's just your own penny, keep that in mind that somebody might have to come in and rip that up. So be wary. Where would you put a rain garden on this site? So you've got water coming down a downspout here, water coming off this downspout. You can even see that there's some browner dead vegetation there, concentrated flow. So we're putting a rain garden here. It is closer to the street, but I just wanted to give you an idea of where a rain garden might be here. So collecting that stormwater runoff before it goes into the street. And then when we do these plantings, we use native plants. And the next series, Erin Loeffler and Kathy Wood are presenting on the next presentation are presenting on native plants. So I don't need to go in super depth on this, but we like to use native plants for projects. Native plants are adapted. They can pretty much withstand anything Mother Nature throws at them. Resistance to disease and pests. They provide shelter and food for all flora and fauna that they've co-evolved with, do well in sand, clay, peat, really any kind of soil, blooms all seasons, crazy deep root systems, non-native plantings, which means that something came from overseas or did not originate in our region. Usually high maintenance, requires insecticides, could provide shelter and food for some pests. Generally are called weedy plants. A lot of them are one color, short-lived, and not extensive root systems. So these root systems are crazy. They can be up to 15 feet deep on these native plants, which help at infiltrating stormwater runoff, water, all of that, help infiltrate it through the soil, cleaning up all those pollutants before it actually gets into our groundwater. And then these roots also help with erosion. So if we do a shoreline restoration, these roots will basically eliminate any erosion you have going on. So plus a whole ecosystem for microorganisms, it's just a whole different biome down there. These plants are just incredible. And if you look at your lawn grass is 3 inches deep. So that really does nothing for infiltration or holding your soil in place. And then also the above ground vegetation, great for pollinator nesting, resting, habitat, food source, slows down that runoff before it gets to where it wants to go, and also really nice for us to look at. So lots of benefits. Some examples of non-native plants, your lawn grass, reed canary, smooth brome, feather reedgrass, marigolds, geraniums, Queen Anne's lace. Again, I could go into depth, but next presentation will be even more detailed. Native plants that we really love: prairie blazing star, purple prairie clover, showy milkweed, butterfly milkweed, smooth blue aster, mountain mint, rattlesnake master, Indian grass, oxeye sunflower, purple coneflower, black-eyed Susan, big blue stem, also called turkeyfoot, wild bergamot, warrior plant, I think here, little blue stem, and side oats grandma. These are all really excellent native plants that are good for rain gardens and also good for maybe the higher parts of rain gardens, and then also good for pollinators too. So again, benefits of native plants. We're talking about native plants, rain gardens, pollinators. They all go hand in hand. So pollinators are a keystone species. Our bumblebees, our bats, our hummingbirds, monarch butterflies. In fact, over 85% of our 352,000 plants depend on insects for pollination, and 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food and drink require a pollinator. So we want to plant these native plants for our pollinators, for other flora and fauna, and also because we love these different kinds of foods, right? So if we didn't have pollinators, we wouldn't have avocados, we wouldn't have tomatoes for pizza, we wouldn't have apples. So plant native plants for our pollinators. 5 steps to help pollinators: plant native planting, so rain gardens, diversity of blooms, protect nests and egg laying sites, leave overwintering habitat, and just don't use pesticides. So you're here today to learn about rain gardens. All right, cruising along. So we're thinking about putting in a rain garden. Think about, where's runoff coming from, going to? What's your soil like? How well does your site drain? How much sun does your site get? A lot of our species, like our favorite species, like 6+ hours of sun. Any easement structures? Do you have any eroding areas? What's the neighboring existing vegetation like? Is that going to impede your restoration efforts? Is there a desired shape that you want? And then where would your inlet be and your berm be? Your inlet as in where the water is coming from, and your berm of which is holding your water in place. So sizing the rain garden, the depth is more important than the area. Average size is about 300 square feet near downspout. Those are typically the projects we help folks do, and you can fit it into your existing landscaping. So we encourage folks to call Go for One. It's no charge. And to help determine a shape, just use a hose. Get a hose or a long rope to kind of be funky and figure out a shape that you want. And then if you want, we can come out and do a site visit for you. And we'll bring our bucket of materials, literally a 5-gallon bucket. We'll spray paint the shape for you, pound in a lath, use a line level, show you how far down you need to dig. And it's really that easy. So I'll go into a little bit more detail here, but the lath in the back there is where the water is coming from. There's a string going to the back to the berm where the water is going to. That's going to be your depression in that spray painted area. You got to do some excavating and then you get to plant, and then voila, you've got a rain garden. So here there's a graphic on the very top left there. The uphill stake is where the inlet's coming from, because that's a lath pounded in. And then on the back side, there's a lath pounded into the ground as well. You're taking a string, tying it to ground level at the inlet side, and then running that to the back lath where the berm is, and using a line level, wherever that's level, you're tying it off. And then you can take a tape measure literally, and for 6 to 9 inch depth rain garden, all along that line where you're digging stitches down excavated material, bringing it back to the berm, building it up, and voila, you've got your rain garden. 3 to 1 side slopes, sloping into the rain garden, outside the rain garden. Here's a better depiction of that. So you've got a slope, you're digging down 9 inches, bringing that excavated material into the back to fill up your berm. Doing okay on time. So we like to have a flat bottom. And again, those slopes. So this is kind of an overall depiction of what a rain garden looks like. I do want to note that we have a whole bunch of material, step-by-step guide on how to do these projects that will be made available to you. If you do attend one of our workshops, you get a whole packet of information. So we'll make that all available to you after this presentation. So you're ready to dig. You've got your, you've got your lath, you've got how far you don't need to dig, you've got your line level. It's really not rocket science, and it doesn't need to be perfect. These are, you can get these projects done within a weekend, 2 weekends. So remove that sod with a sod cutter, a shovel, work the bottom of you want to have a compacted berm because you are planting on the berm. Don't use landscaping fabric. Loosen up the bottom of the rain garden a little bit, till and shovel. We do recommend that you put 3 inches of compost in there. You might need to have some sand to help with some infiltration. And there are different ways you can be creative in getting water to your rain garden. So there's rain chains, there's dry creek beds, there's PVC pipes coming off of patios. I really love the bottom left 2 photos. That's the downspout going down a hill and then being outletted into a little turret in a rain garden at the bottom of the hill. So kind of fun. You can be as creative as you want. You do see rock in a lot of these pictures, and that rock has helped to disperse energy before that concentrated flow gets into the garden. So you're not washing away mulch and plants. We also encourage putting in edging. So this helps keep the weeds down. Again, long grass is about 3 inches deep. So trying to keep those out just saves you time, energy. We also want you to use 3 inches of double shredded hardwood mulch. Mulch before you plant. Double shredded hardwood mulch holds together better. If you think about a rain garden going up and down and up and down, that mulch holds together and is more cohesive rather than your standard flat pine mulch. And then no color, natural. If you have a big garden, you can get a bulb attachment for your drill to help plant. So you've got your excavation, you've got your mulch, and then you're ready to plant. So we can do the planting plan for you. We have materials that you can use to make your own planting plan. Also, we made it even more easy where we have a native plant kit and seed mix sale that we do every year. We've been the largest sale in Minnesota for the last 4 years. We have a variety of kits you can choose from. Check out our website to check these out. Really fun, really exciting. We get our plants through M&L. We also have a rain garden kit, so check it out. Also, this is a great website, Blue Thumb Plant Finder tool. Super fun. They just updated it, and really great resource for you gardeners and native plant enthusiasts out there. Main thing, diversity is key. Super important to have something blooming spring, summer, fall. for our nesting, resting, pollinators, habitat, food source. Also nice for us to look at. Maintenance. There is some maintenance to these rain gardens, some common weeds to look for. And then we also, so not maintenance free, but low maintenance, water it if we need to up front, about 1 inch of water, 1 inch per week. Weeding, so we do ask that you mark the plants while you're planting, just so it's easy. It's easy to do some weeding. So I've definitely pulled up little plants before that I thought were weeds and they weren't, and I was really sad. Just helps with ID. And then keep that double shredded hardwood mulch maintained for at least the first year or so until your rain garden fills in and it starts to really, really bloom and blossom. And then also I have to put a plug in for just creating nesting habitat. So right now, you can be cutting back your stems because we have around 500 native bees and beneficial insects in Minnesota. That's just one little mama bee flying around doing her thing, and she'll go in and actually lay her eggs into a hollow stem. So these hollow stems, they'll lay their eggs during the summer. The vegetation is giving them food sources. In the fall, there's a food source there, a space for them to hibernate. So here's another picture that is even in more detail. You can see inside the stem, there's a larva, pollen, this little carpenter bee doing her thing. Super, super cool. And I know we're really excited to get out in our yards, but our pollinators are still hibernating. Just wait until there's a consistent 50 degrees of in your soil temperature until we get out raking, because those guys are they're hanging out for the right time, the right temperature. Examples of completed rain gardens. Cloquet Public Library, really great project there. There was water coming off coming off the corner there. We captured it before it went into the street, did a 3-day workshop there with the community. This is a private landowner in Cloquet, downspout coming off of the house, outletted down to the St. Louis River. They put in a rain garden and then really beefed it up with a pollinator meadow on the perimeter of it. 2 downspouts coming off a house here into this ditch. We captured that runoff before it went into this ditch that was awful to mow. Even put in some retaining blocks back there to help hold the berm in place. This was a very eroded area on a steep slope that we wanted to capture runoff on. Put in a little retaining wall in the back there. They probably should have put a bit more rock on the top there to help disperse the energy, the water flow, because you can see it's a little sparse on the right side. And then they also did a rain garden in the front to capture water off the sidewalk, the roof, their driveway. I love this project. This is done by Barnum. They captured runoff from their sidewalk, from their roof, and then they made it into a place where they can just enjoy, sit and have a cup of coffee on their patio and have their friends over and just enjoy their pollinators and educate them about the importance of capturing stormwater runoff and pollinator habitat. Carlton County Fairgrounds, this is with the Northeastern Minnesota Beekeepers Association. Weird spot that was really always wet. We turned it into this awesome rain garden. Check it out during fair time. We did other projects there on site too that are great demonstration projects. And then I'm very excited about this project. This was done by an Eagle Scout at Washington Elementary. I was his conservation advisor and he wanted to do his own rain garden in front of the school. So super pumped for this kid. He's doing great things. And we do have funds available. So Lawns to Legumes, some of you may have heard about that. I do help coach on that particular program. Even if you don't live in Carlton, I'm more than happy to help field questions. We have funds. We have had funds through this program, through this grant, and it's awesome. You can also apply individually, but we do have funds here in-house, or we did. Planning on applying for some more. And then we just have our very own pollinator program here in Carlton. We're doing some awesome stuff. Really pumped about just the interest and enthusiasm, and people are just excited to get pollinator projects on the ground. And like I said, we have a program here in Carlton. Kyle Hildebrandt with South St. Louis is excellent. Kari with Lake, Max or Steven with Cook, and then Kayla with North. Everybody's doing really cool stuff around here. So again, this is just a little handout on what a rain garden could look like, or a bee lawn, or a shoreline restoration project, pollinator pockets. We help, and these are all typical lawns to legumes projects too. This is an awesome resource for you guys. Bookmark it on your computer. Everything you need to know about rain gardens is at bluethumb.org. And with that, that's all I have for you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alyssa.
Yeah.
Questions are already starting to file in, so I think let's jump into some Q&A here. Again, reminder, folks, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, or if you just want to throw them in the chat, that's fine too. But Alyssa, first question about rain gardens. Would one be able to do a mix of vegetables or herbs that also like moisture as well as native flowers in their rain garden?
Yeah, good question. So if you're working with us at the district, we only help cost share on native plants, obviously because of the benefits for them. So you're welcome to do that. So I guess if you're looking at maybe putting vegetables in maybe on the perimeter, I mean, that's a really interesting question because I've never been asked that, but you're kind of putting vegetables with native plants, and the native plants could draw the pollinators in to help pollinate your vegetables and your herbs. So I kind of see that as maybe having your rain garden loving plants in the basin area, and then along the berm, you could have your herbs and your veggies. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, I think design consideration wise would just be how tall those native plants might get. And
Yeah.
would they shade out more than you care to for
Yeah.
your vegetable?
Here's,
But I think if you do some shrubby or some scrubby stort stuff on the edge, why
yeah.
not?
Yeah.
Um, Alyssa, another rain garden question is typically how much rain can a rain garden handle? It's like how much wood could a woodchuck chuck?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Great.
do you have certain design considerations that you're doing for that, or
Yep,
what
we
does that look
do.
like?
So we typically design these rain gardens for 1-inch storm events. And like I said, we do a way more in-depth presentation on this, on sizing, infiltration tests at our Create a Rain Garden workshops. But if you have really funky soils and if you experience a lot of water, so like for instance, if you want to put a rain garden in by a sub pump, I mean, you probably want to look at that more, like how much water is coming to that site. So there are tools, there are programs that we use to help determine amounts of runoff, how big your rain garden should be. But the classic, most typical size we do is 300 square feet, 400 square feet, and for a 1-inch rain event.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Other question is just maybe a little bit less about rain gardens, but still related is if someone is interested in a career in this field, who can they reach out to?
Yeah, so we actually have a job posting right now,
Oh, perfect.
for a forestry position. We also have a water resources technician position that'll be posted here in April that would entail helping landowners and cities, schools, other entities implement stormwater practices, so rain gardens. Really great resources, conservation job board. We've been posting on Indeed, Handshake, all these other places, but visiting the MASWCD website is really helpful too, on soil and water district positions. So it's a great place to work. I've been doing this for about 15 years now. I've worked at 3 different districts. So it's just great because you get to work one-on-one with the landowner, have that relationship, really build up, we're like your next door neighbor. It's so fun. And then get conservation on the ground.
Questions? Are there any issues that you folks can run into with city zoning? This is about city zoning and rain barrels, but maybe we can just talk about city zoning and just any green infrastructure practices. I'm not familiar, at least in city of Duluth, with concerns around rain barrels, but there might be city ordinances in certain communities around rain barrels. Alyssa, anything on your end there?
I don't. And I do know that in the past, some cities have had issues or problems with native vegetation in people's yards, like it looks messy. But I think a lot of communities are having a change of face in that and are letting folks do more of these native messier plantings in their property. So letting their lawn get, not letting their plants get more than however many inches that originally they were supposed to be at. So, but yeah, in terms of permitting ordinances, these small scale projects, you really shouldn't have to worry about any of that. The biggest thing is just the easements that they might have and then calling goal for one, so you're not digging into a utility line or something.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure of on the Minnesota side communities, but I know there are some Wisconsin side communities where, there are some requirements, especially about how close to the road or how close to the sidewalk you might have to put 6 inches to a couple of feet back. So I do recommend looking into your city ordinance around what
Yep.
that could look like and just
Yep.
confirm. But question here from Kathy. Will your organization advise / help with a biosphere project?
So bioswale, I'm guessing that she might
Oh,
be referring
maybe.
to. Yep, we do quite a few bioswales.
Cool.
Actually, so bioswales, we typically put them on maybe a landscape that's more sloped. And so, because Tiff talked about those rock check dams, which helps slow water down, backing that up so it has the chance to infiltrate down through the soil, get those roots really working on infiltrating that runoff. So we've done quite a few of those bioswales around lake shores where there's maybe a steeper slope and we're filtering that runoff before it goes into the lake. But anything, honestly, we do anything that involves restoration, ecological projects, engineering, anything that has to do with a resource concern will help you do.
Thanks for that, Alyssa. We have a question here about rain barrel costs and maintenance. Typically what we say from our side is a rain barrel can cost as little or as much as folks want it to cost, really. There's a lot of folks out there doing some really cool projects around repurposing barrels. I know City of Superior has some really nice rain barrel programs, and I know that they are going to be running a workshop series this spring. We'll make sure to get those links to you. I do know that WLSSD also did the rain barrel and compost sale again. I admittedly don't remember what date those become available if they already have. Typically, those go very quickly. So I highly recommend, if that's of interest to you, to look into that. But you can get usually a nice barrel for under $100. And honestly, in the world of the World Wide Web, there's a lot of resources there. Some of the things that we do recommend for rain barrel maintenance is just making sure that you drain your barrel before winter, because with that ice buildup, you potentially, especially if you have a plastic barrel, risk your barrel cracking. The other things we also recommend is a couple of times a year. Obviously, this will also depend on barrel size and how easy that is for you to do. We do recommend fully draining and washing out your barrel, or at least spraying it out. Typically, you can get kind of a film residue on there. And then a lot of times we also recommend making sure your rain barrel has a screen on it. That can help with concerns around mosquitoes, which we do have a question in here about them for rain gardens we'll get to in a second, as well as I have friends who have habitual chipmunk issues in their barrel. So just trying to keep your critters out of your barrel. But Alyssa, do rain gardens encourage mosquitoes?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I might have I think this was maybe a slide that I was trying to get that fun music playing on, so I might have missed talking about this. So rain gardens are essentially a 6 to 9 inch depression in your property, and they're designed to drain within 48 hours. So they're not like a pond, there's not standing water in there. If there is, there'll be standing water for about 48 hours and that's it. So no mosquitoes, no worries on that.
Yeah, good comment, Alyssa, that really the goal of the rain garden is to not be a stagnant body of water. It's just to
Correct.
slow how much that water infiltrates, but to not actually just sit stagnant with water.
Yep.
Good question. Other questions folks have? I see Madison is putting into the chat for folks who might be interested in our additional webinars. As we've talked about here, I think Alyssa's done a great job giving you kind of a preview around native plants. Our next webinar, we are going to dive deep into them. And then our last webinar, we are going to talk about green infrastructure in the community. So thinking about from what are SWCDs doing at that larger scale? What is our city doing at that larger scale? And so thinking about bioswales at a scale that is beyond the size of most of our properties, which is very exciting. But other questions folks have? Well, Madison, I'm not seeing any other questions popping up in the chat here.
That's all right. I can stall for just a moment. These have been really great questions. You may have missed, Alyssa, while you were talking, we were doing what was your favorite native plant? So I don't know if you want to chime in. Tiff shared hers. Do you have a favorite native plant as I'm pulling up our final slides?
I do. My daughter's named after it, Dahlia. So Dahlia purpurea, purple prairie clover. I think I just love that plant because it's beautiful. but it puts nitrogen back in the soil. It's purple. It's my favorite color. But I just love how the pollen on that's like blaze orange, and you can see if a bee or an insect has visited that plant because the little pollen balls on their legs are like blaze orange. So I love dahlia. But
I
also,
love
I mean, it's hard because I'm a native plant geek, and I mentioned this during the slide. Wild bergamot Bernarda is just, if you want to do a restoration project, that can pretty much do well anywhere. It's kind of a warrior plant. It can be a little aggressive, but yeah, native plants are amazing. They're just so incredible for what they do.
Excellent. I love that connection too, with directly connecting with your family and then with next week's webinar. So I want to encourage the attendees that are here with us today to register for one or both of the next two webinars coming up on next Tuesday, March 18th, and then the following Tuesday, March 25th. They'll be from 6 to 7 p.m. And again, we'll bring in some really excellent speakers who will share about native and deep-rooted perennial plants. And then we'll talk about green infrastructure that you might be seeing at that community scale. So I'm really want to thank our speakers tonight for sharing their expertise and wisdom. And I know there were many, many links and resources that were shared. We will be compiling them for you all, along with captioning this recording and making it available to you as well on the Minnesota Sea Grant YouTube page. So I'm seeing lots of applause come in. So please share your applause with the speakers. And we'll make sure also in our resources to share the contact information of both Alyssa at the Carlton County Soil and Water Conservation District, but then all of the Northeastern Minnesota contacts that were mentioned, just so you can connect up with those folks as well. Tiff, Alyssa, any final words before we let folks go to their evening?
I just want to put a plug in here. If you folks own any lakeshore property, stream-based property, we will be holding a Restore Your Shoreline workshop on March 25th at the Carlton County Transportation Building. If you're interested in attending and learning how to restore your shoreline, you can go ahead and visit our website and register there. It's free. We'll have some light refreshments, a fun workshop that we try to hold annually, and follow that with funding opportunities as well.
Excellent. And there's lots of gratitude that's coming in on the chat for both of you as speakers. So you can read all those good comments. And I'm going to stop our recording and thank you all for joining us and look forward to seeing you next week for our next Springing into Action webinar series. Take care, everyone.